Another big week in the books for Palantir, completing their first full week of trading while in the S&P 500 officially. We get deals, trailers, and press releases, and many more. Now, looking at the stock first, Palantir closed still in the mid $30 range, right below $37. We've recently hit the 38s earlier in the week, but looks like Palantir is still finding its footing in this range and leveled off to close the rest of the week. So it's definitely going to be interesting to follow what comes next. Palantir then drops a cool trailer on their customer service engine. Less conversation, more action. Now, no speakers in this one, but a while back they were pushing this feature where on top of the ontology, you've basically got the ability to utilize chat functions and answer complex customer queries truly based on the data that you have. This full integration seamlessly ties together the data points you have to better serve your customers' needs instead of following, say, a simple workflow that could lead to redundancy and efficiency, and then also now you can truly solve their problems. Definitely looking forward to more trailers like this where the product seems to speak for itself. Now, we get an interesting downgrade to start off the week for the stock because the analyst doesn't necessarily dislike Palantir, but rather it's mostly just a valuation disconnect in their eyes. Raymond James Analyst downgraded the stock from an outperform to market perform rating. Essentially, the rich valuation is where the hesitancy comes from, and notes how quickly the stock has risen, but cautions around the forward price to sales ratio specifically. But it's still important to point out how there are things that the analyst likes, which is Palantir's business model for the long term, and definitely is optimistic around their commercial business expanding. And this is not just surprising, especially when the sentiment around the company has basically flipped, where the only negative thing really pointed out by analysts right now is just the expensiveness of the name. Honestly, I won't be surprised if this becomes the status quo for a while because it gives the analysts some breathing room not to be fully against the company in case that the stock runs. But of course, there's also the flip side where there may be a buying opportunity, so they can still point to the reports as evidence of them being right. But do as you please with this information. Then we get a big PR for Palantir where they are the number one once again as an AI DSML name under Dresner's research of the top vendors. This is 2 years in a row now for Palantir getting the top spot and recognition. And I always like to point this out. It's all right trying to market yourself, but when you get the actual comparisons from a third party outside perspective, it definitely lends a hand to grabbing potential customers' attention, especially when companies are just trying to figure out who even quote unquote does AI. These reports add up because it's another funnel entrance for folks to at least consider looking a bit deeper into Palantir's products, which may lead to a boot camp, building use cases, and then hopefully eventually signing a long-term contract worth some money. Obviously, happening at scale would be great, so seeing more reports like this over time coming out is exciting. Then we get an interesting blip in the middle of the week where one of Palantir's major partners for the government side of their business got raided by the FBI. And it's important to read past the headline showing why the raid was conducted, because it was mostly due to someone having done business with Carahsoft, not Carahsoft themselves. Now, Palantir's relationship with them is to help deploy their products to government customers in the US as well as Canada, and we've actually covered some PRs in the past related to this, although not much more in recent news. Now, I say this is a nothing burger for now, but the powers that be like to take a story and run with it, and they want to tie to the raid news to more eye-grabbing companies that Carahsoft has done business with, and one of them is being Palantir. So rather than any news, this is more of a teaching moment to see why Palantir's name may show up in the news, especially if there's nothing actually happening. And then every week like clockwork too, Palantir announces a new deal, this time in the oil and gas industry with APA Corporation. They point out specifically it is a multi-year, multi-million-dollar deal, and they've been working together for a long time since 2021, the past 3 years, meaning Palantir has already proven their worth and locked in another contract together, with plans to continue expanding use cases and reach amongst their global footprint. Now, with all the new deals, they seem to kind of blend together, honestly, which speaks loudly to Palantir's versatility. We can just as easily sign a new oil and gas partner like here, but also show healthcare, military, supply chain to anything. Palantir is the operational enabler at the foundation of these businesses' data with the ontology, as well as the applications on top through Foundry and AIP that gives enough flexibility for these companies to build out what is truly useful to them. So great job, Palantir, continuing to sign new and old customers alike. Then we get a surprise price target increase by Wedbush's Dan Ives from $38 up to $45 now. With the current share float, he is expecting Palantir to reach over $95 billion in market cap in the near future within a couple years. Now, just like Raymond James downgrade, even with the bull analyst, it's up to you to take this with a grain of salt on how you'd like to account for this information. I usually just like to see if they found something new or got insider insights to certain customers that typical members of the public don't get easy access to. But Dan Ives has been consistent during Palantir's turnaround and narrative, and we'll see if he ends up right in the end. Then we get a cool inside look revealed by Palantir's head of commercial business, Ted Mraby, post of how unique Palantir is as a company, with the especially long tenures of their officers, many being at the company more than a decade, but even gives additional breakdowns of other cohorts like 10 years, comparisons to average and median CEO tenures in the S&P 500. But essentially, it tells us that Palantir is uniquely positioned with new perspectives, but also grounded with historical context from these long tenured employees who have seen the evolution of their projects and products throughout the company. And especially for the relationship part of the business, having consistency to demonstrate to customers can give that much needed reputational context of keeping good people. And hopefully this continues to persist for Palantir. Then we get a pretty surprising price prediction coming from Keith Fitzgerald, a big Palantir bull. On Fox Business, he noted how in 3 to 5 years, he has no doubts that Palantir can be a $100 stock. Now, of course, he has to preface that it will be volatile, but at least publicly, this is the highest price we've heard. Now, it's up to you if you think that's possible, and everyone can argue either direction, honestly, but with the recent momentum around Palantir's name, as well as the good publicity, it's not actually surprising to start hearing murmurs of these price predictions like this. Now, if we think about it from market cap wise in 3 to 5 years, the number of outstanding shares will be different, of course, but at least today, $100 would mean Palantir would be over $200 billion in market cap. Justifying that price will definitely be interesting, but it doesn't mean other possibilities like staying stagnant or even going down due to something else is possible. So do what you want with this information. Now, I saved the more constant narrative from this whole week to cover, which is Peter Thiel's offloading of Palantir shares. Now, remember, these are trading plans and are pre-planned sales, so it's not necessarily surprising. And of course, that covers his basis when it comes to any insider kind of transactions. But the news is always new to someone, of course. So in total for this week, he offloaded around 20 million shares. And with a little math from the previous Form 4 and the latest Form 144, that leaves him with around 79 million Class A shares. Now, he has multiple holding companies, but seems like he was selling from a specific one here under footnote 3. Now, as a co-founder, he's obviously multiplied his initial investment over the last 2 decades, so feel free to judge if it is justified for him to diversify. Obviously, this technically puts sell pressure on the stock, but with the recent price action, it seemed to be holding up to that liquidity he is bringing to the market. Now, we'll continue to see if more selling is coming and if it will have an effect eventually on the stock, but I'm curious to know what your view is on Peter Thiel selling, who isn't necessarily part of the day-to-day operations at Palantir at this point as chairman. So let me know your thoughts below on all the news this week, and I'll see you in the next video.